This is a video about a journey to see the highlights of Patagonia. From Buenos Aires, we flew south to Patagonia. At El Chaltén, we hiked up to see the stunning Cerro Fitzroy, then on to El Calafate, where we visited the massive Perito Moreno Glacier, and then went on to explore the Torres del Paine National Park before heading to Punta Arenas and finishing up in Ushuaia. We flew south from winter in the land of ice and snow to a land in full summer. After a brief stop in Santiago de Chile, we flew across the mighty Andes to Buenos Aires. From Buenos Aires, we flew 3¼ hours south to cover the 2,100 kilometers to El Calafate's airport. Leaving Buenos Aires, we flew over the brown waters of the River Plate with its ocean-going cargo ships steaming along. The skies were clear, and nearing El Calafate, we could see the famous mountains at El Chaltén, some 80 kilometers away in the distance. Landing at El Calafate, we immediately drove north for 4 hours to cover the 220 kilometers to reach El Chaltén, where we'd hike to see Monte Fitzroy. From cyclists battling the winds to wildlife to an interesting landscape, there was lots to see as we drove on to El Chaltén. Rheas are large flightless birds that are native to South America, but are related to the ostrich and emu. Although they can't fly, they open and lower their wings when they run. Gunacos jumping over the fences occasionally get hung up and die on them. At the bridge across the Rio La Leona, we stopped for a break at the Hotel La Leona, where we could get our first glimpse of the snow-covered Andes in the distance. As we drove alongside the long Lago Viedma, we started to get good views of the mountain spires around El Chaltén. The road to El Chaltén goes up and down and around like a roller coaster, with ever more beautiful views of the spires. The area around El Chaltén is in the Parque Nacional Los Glaciares. Cerro Torre is one of the most beautiful mountains in the world. The steepness of its spire, the mushroom of rime ice on its summit, and the notorious Patagonian weather make it a very difficult climb. Nearby Monte Fitzroy is an equally impressive mountain. El Chaltén is a small mountain town nestled in the Rio de las Vueltas Valley. The village was built in 1985 by the Argentine government to help secure the disputed border with Chile. Today, the sole reason for its existence is tourism. El Chaltén's permanent population is about 1,000 people, and it increases considerably in the summer months during the height of the tourist season. The town is mainly a simple resort, but tourists come from around the world to climb and hike the surrounding mountains. The town is surrounded by mountains, with the peaks of Cerro Torre and Monte Fitzroy visible from the town. We made a 9-hour hike to see the Fitzroy Massif from Laguna de los Tres. To avoid retracing our steps, our hike started at El Pilar and ended back at El Chaltén. For the classic Laguna de los Tres hike, we were up early and soon were driving 17 kilometers north to El Pilar, where our hike would start. The beautiful views of Fitzroy from the road added to the anticipation of starting the hike. From the trailhead, we could see the summit of Fitzroy in the distance, peeking over a ridge. The trail from El Pilar to Laguna de los Tres is moderate until near the end, where it rears up steeply in a 400-meter climb. The hike along the Rio Blanco afforded us great views of the mountains, glaciers, and a lake. The trail passes through a quiet forest with large lenga beech trees. As we hiked along Rio Blanco, our views of Fitzroy were constantly changing, but were always fascinating. The glacier descending off the east side of Fitzroy ends in a tumble of blue seracs descending into Laguna Piedras Blancas. Fitzroy was called Chaltén by the indigenous people. Chaltén means smoking mountain and reflects the clouds that usually form around the mountain's summit. There were impressive views of the granite spires in the Fitzroy Massif that culminated in the mass of Monte Fitzroy itself. The trail passes through a wide open area with a grand view of the whole landscape. Near the Ponceano campground, we joined the trail coming up from El Chaltén, so the number of hikers increased significantly. The trail passes through the Ponceano campground, which is located in a beautiful beech forest. Shortly after crossing the Rio Blanco on a log bridge, the trail becomes very steep, as 400 meters must be climbed up to a ridge to get to Laguna de los Tres. Hiking through the trail maintenance work, we had lunch in a shelter before starting up the steep trail to the top of the moraine 400 meters above us. The trail up the 400-meter rise is steep and rocky, so care is required both going up and descending.
Poder detener la marcha de la injusticia, eliminar los corruptos y sus mentiras.
Finally, after a tough slog up the steep trail, we reached the top of the moraine and could finally get an unobstructed view of the beautiful mountains behind the glacier-fed Laguna de los Tres. We were fortunate that Fitzroy was not the smoking mountain that day during our visit, otherwise it would have been a lot of effort for naught. Monte Fitzroy is one of the most challenging peaks in the world despite its average height. This is due to its sheer granite faces and the frequently wild Patagonian weather. While hundreds of people may reach the summit of Mount Everest during a season, Fitzroy might only be successfully summited once during the year. There's an impressive bergschrund on the glacier high up on the east flank of the Ponceano Spire. Descending from Laguna de los Tres, we started back on the 10-kilometer hike to El Chaltén.
Detener la marcha de la injusticia, erradicar los corruptos y sus mentiras. Ahora, para medir la ternura que da una madre.
That the weather had granted us a break was soon evident when Fitzroy Massif became shrouded in a cloudy mantle, living up to its name of Smoking Mountain. It was a long slog back down to El Chaltén with a wonderful view near the end, out over the valley of the Rio de las Voltas. At the trail's end back in El Chaltén, we are grateful to have seen the Fitzroy Massif in all its glory. Returning from El Chaltén, we stopped at El Calafate to see the impressive Perito Moreno Glacier. El Calafate is a town of some 22,000 people, and it is now the jumping-off point for tourists wanting to see the wonders of Los Glaciares National Park. The Perito Moreno Glacier, 80 kilometers from El Calafate, is named after the explorer Francisco Moreno, a pioneer who studied the region in the 19th century. There's lots to see on the drive to the glacier, starting with the waterfall on Lago Argentino, which includes swans and flamingos. The estancias along the way were very evocative of the Argentina in our mind's eye. The Perito Moreno Glacier is only one of 3 Patagonian glaciers that are growing despite glaciers shrinking elsewhere. The reasons for the growth remains debated by glaciologists. Tour boats take tourists out to the glacier's terminus where they can hike upon the glacier. Due to its size, accessibility, and active calving, the glacier is one of the major tourist attractions in southern Patagonia. At its terminus, the glacier is 5 kilometers wide with an average height of 74 meters above the surface of Lago Argentino. The tourist facilities at the glacier are very good, with a walkway that affords good viewing of the activity at the terminus. There is even an elevator that takes people down to the lower walkway level. Given that it was a bright sunny day, there were beautiful blues visible in the crevasses at the glacier terminus. We spent our time at the terminus waiting for calving events to occur. Fortunately, because the glacier is advancing, it calves frequently, and we saw 5 such events in our hour of watching. It's all happening now, Donna. Leaving the glacier, we headed back to El Calafate, where we caught a public bus for the 272-kilometer drive to Puerto Natales in Chile. It took about 4 hours for this drive, given the 2 sets of border crossing formalities involved, one to get out of Argentina and the other to get into Chile. Our guide sat up front in the bus and made and shared yerba mate tea with the bus driver. Mate is reported to have a number of positive effects, such as increasing mental energy and focus. For us, it kept the bus driver awake as he was talking to the person whom he was sharing the mate with. The bus ride gave most passengers a chance to sleep, although if awake, the passing scene was interesting to watch. At the Argentine border, we had to stop and check out of the country. This stop gave us a chance to watch a gaucho with 2 sheepdogs shepherding his flock in the distance.
How nicely did the horsey go. Come, 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 come.
Now he's got 2 sheepdogs with him.
I think it was him.
Once checked out of Argentina, we drove on to the Chilean border control post at Villa Cerro Castillo. We had to set out our luggage on the ground so that a sniffer dog could check it out, as our passports were being checked. The final part of the drive to Puerto Natales was interesting, with some condors and a lenticular cloud in the sky overhead. Puerto Natales, a small town of 20,000, was just an overnight stop for us before we drove on to Torre del Paine National Park in Chile's Patagonia region. Visitors to Puerto Natales are welcomed by a giant ground sloth known as the Megalodon, whose remains were found in a cave nearby. Although Puerto Natales appears to be inland, it is actually on the Ultima Esperanza Sound, which connects in a serpentine way to the Pacific Ocean. The Amor al Viento, or Love of the Wind statue, was erected in 2012 as a tribute to the notorious Patagonian winds that regularly reach speeds of 100 kilometers per hour. We later experienced these winds in the mountains at the Pehoé campground. The city was settled by European immigrants, primarily Germans, English, Welsh, Scots, Croats, Greeks, Italians, and Spaniards. Traces of this heritage can be found in businesses throughout the city. We saw a wedding, but a damper may have been put on that wedding by police issuing traffic tickets. From Puerto Natales, we drove 100 kilometers north on an overcast, dreary day to Torre del Paine National Park, to the start of our hike to see the famous granite towers that give the park its name. After a stop at Villa Cerro Castillo, we drove through the rain towards the mountains, passing by rheas, guanacos, geese, and caracaras. The hike from the Hotel Las Torres to the Mirador Las Torres is about 10 kilometers, with a planning figure of about 7 hours for the round-trip hike. Our hike, however, lasted 10.5 hours in total. As my hiking boots unexpectedly split their seams at the sole, I used duct tape to make a desperate emergency repair before the hike started. Only time would tell how long this repair lasted. We started our hike to the Torre del Paine from the parking lot of the Hotel Las Torres. The trail to the Mirador Las Torres is rated as being of medium difficulty. It starts off deceptively flat, but soon steepens as it climbs up the Rio Ascencio Valley. Until the Refugio El Chileno, the trail is shared with horses led by gauchos packing out tourists.
Hola!
Yeah.
Nearing the Refugio El Chileno, we descended down to the bridge to cross the fast-flowing Rio Ascencio. For those making an overnight hike, the Refugio has shared bedrooms, a camping ground, hot showers, and a restaurant. For day hikers like us, the Refugio's dining hall was a welcome place to eat our packed lunch out of the rain. At the Refugio, horses to pack out tourists could be hired for about $70, and there was no shortage of customers. After the refugio, the trail continued upwards and passed over several fast-flowing streams. Interesting sights along the trail included a large conglomerate rock, a first view of the towers, uprooted tree roots clinging onto rocks, and wonderful parallel dikes. Emerging from the Lenga Beach forest, the trail becomes a steep rocky ascent over talus and moraine. The path is not well marked, so care is required to keep going in the correct direction. Nearing the Mirador Las Torres, the trail affords wonderful mountain views, although the towers are not fully visible. Finally cresting the ridge, the Mirador Las Torres was attained, and the three Torres del Paine were in full view towering above us. The clouds were boiling over the towers during our stay, but fortunately the rain had stopped and the sun had come out. Our efforts getting to the Mirador had paid off, and we were not disappointed. Departing the Mirador, the hike back down to the Hotel Las Torres was still an effort, and as we descended the sky became overcast and it started to drizzle. My duct tape emergency repair of my hiking boots had not survived the hike. Finally, after 10.5 hours, we were back at our bus at the Hotel Las Torres and off to a nearby private campsite with an outstanding view of the towers. The views of the Torre del Paine nearing sunset were ever changing as the clouds formed and disappeared over top of it. A short sleep was followed by an early rise at 5 a.m. to watch the stars over the mountains. Surprisingly, not only the stars were out in the dark. Catching the sight of a puma in the wild is like winning the Patagonian lottery, since these secretive creatures are masters at quietly blending into the background. Pumas are most active in the very early morning or as the sun is setting. And lo and behold, just before 6 a.m., a pair of pumas walked by the campsite, stopped, and stared at us before continuing on. The golden sunrise on the Torre del Paine made for an interesting sight. After breakfast, we were off on a short drive to catch the ferry to the Pehoé campground where we'd spend the night. On the drive to the ferry, there were excellent views of the mountains, including the Cuernos del Paine, or literally the Horns of Paine.
Oh my god! I know.
Not from here, guys, because it's.
Oh, look! Oh! That's a good photo! Oh, yeah! That's a really good photo!
One is mounting another one.
Oh, yeah.
Bang, chicka, bang, wang, chicka, bang, wang. You wanna go?
Nice, they're great.
I think they are playing.
Doesn't look like great to me. Oh, no.
Look, as you can see, they are not fighting. Ooh, ooh. When they fight, they put the ears down and they try to bite the testicles.
The ferry ride across Lago Pehoé to Pehoé campground was rough, as the Patagonian wind was high. There were excellent views of the Cuerno del Paine during the crossing. At the Pehoé campground dock, there was a large number of hikers waiting to catch the ferry back. The wind at the campground was still high, making it difficult for campers struggling to erect their tents. The dining hall was crowded with hikers looking to get a break from the high winds and cold temperature. The high wind made for very changeable weather. We made 2 short hikes from the campground, one towards Cuernos del Paine and the other to Lago Grey. We hiked towards the French Valley to better see the Cuernos del Paine. The dramatic Punta Arenas dominated the northern skyline. The strong wind ripped the top of the waves off on Lago Pehoé. The sword-like Cerro Espada clearly stood out on the skyline. Arriving back at the campground, it was bedtime, although the flapping of the tent in the wind didn't help sleep. At breakfast in the dining hall, we noticed the racist sign blaming a forest fire on the deliberate actions of a Jew. This was a reference to a fire in 2012 that burned about 176 square kilometers of the park. The trees burnt in this fire were evident as we hiked to Lago Grey. Fresh snow had fallen on the mountains overnight, and the wind was blowing a gale. There were light blue bergy bits grounded on Lago Grey that were being battered by the waves whipped up by the high wind. The bergy bits come from the Glacier Grey at the northern end of Lago Grey. Returning to the campground, we walked down to the dock and lined up to wait for the next ferry. Leaving Lago Pehoé behind, we headed south to Punta Arenas, which would be our next overnight stop. We stopped to see a herd of guanacos feeding beside a small lake with the wonderful backdrop of a rugged ice-covered mountain. Guanacos are related to the camels found in Africa and Asia. They are also related to vicunas, llamas, and alpacas, which all live in South America. Guanacos and vicunas are wild animals, unlike llamas and alpacas, which have been domesticated. Guanacos are ever alert to dangers to the herd. Back in Puerto Natales, we waited in the bus terminal for a public bus that would take us 250 kilometers south in 3 hours to Punta Arenas. Punta Arenas is the capital city of Chile's most southern region. It has a population of about 120,000 and is located on the Straits of Magellan. Chile has used Punta Arenas as a base to defend its sovereignty claims in the southernmost part of South America. The shags at the port struggled to make any headway against the strong southerly wind. The port is logistically important in accessing West Antarctica. In fact, there was a U.S. Antarctic resupply vessel in port. The public cemetery of Punta Arenas, started in 1894, has been ranked by CNN as one of the most beautiful cemeteries in the world. It was designated a National Monument of Chile in 2012. Giant topiary trees dominate the cemetery. The impressive chapels of the great families in the history of Punta Arenas contrast with the small burial niches of the lesser mortals. After walking around downtown, we had a traditional supper of Chilean beef in a restaurant with memorable symbols for the ladies and the men's rooms. In the main square of Punta Arenas is a statue to Ferdinand Magellan, the Portuguese explorer sailing for Spain, who passed close to the present site of Punta Arenas in 1520 while circumnavigating the earth for Spain. From Punta Arenas, we caught a public bus that would take us 620 kilometers south to Ushuaia in Argentina in 9 hours. One and a half hours out of Punta Arenas, we arrived at the ferry crossing of the Straits of Magellan. The ferry crosses the narrowest part of the Straits of Magellan to connect mainland Chile to Tierra del Fuego. Once loaded, the ferry crossing only takes about 20 minutes. However, frequent high winds can cause long delays in crossing. The day prior to our crossing, the ferry was cancelled due to the winds. The Strait of Magellan provides a well-protected inland waterway for safe navigation between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, but it is considered a difficult route to navigate because of the unpredictable winds and currents and the narrowness of the passage. Ferdinand Magellan of Portugal discovered and navigated the strait in 1520 during his global circumnavigation voyage in the service of Charles I of Spain. Once across the strait, we were in Tierra del Fuego, but still in Chile. The name Tierra del Fuego is Spanish for the land of fire. It is an archipelago split between Chile and Argentina. The name Tierra del Fuego came about because of the fires of the native population seen by the early European explorers. The native populations of Tierra del Fuego were largely forced off their land in the latter half of the 19th century. The northern part of Tierra del Fuego has estancias raising sheep. Despite the strong wind, there were still hardy bicycle tourists trying to move against the wind, whom we watched as we were being served coffee on our bus. Finally, we arrived at the border and were checked out of Chile before being cleared into Argentina. The concern about Ebola was evident at the border. Nearing Ushuaia, the rolling open countryside was replaced by a mountainous one. Finally, after 9 hours, we entered the city of Ushuaia, which, while on the surface is not the most interesting of cities, it has some interesting attractions if one digs deeper. Ushuaia was originally named by early British missionaries using the native Yamana Indian name for the bay on which the city is sited. Although Ushuaia touts itself as Fin del Mundo, or End of the World, a check of a map will show that the nearby Chilean town of Puerto Williams is further south still. Ushuaia's population growth in the late 19th century was centered around the prison built by the Argentine government to both increase the Argentine population in the area and to ensure Argentine sovereignty over Tierra del Fuego. A cup of mate went well with lunch. We were lucky that the Carnaval de Ushuaia was on during our visit, so we got to see the parade with its wide variety of carnival groups displaying their talents. Ushuaia has a beautiful old-fashioned carousel that is still in use. Like other Argentine cities, Ushuaia has a Falklands War Memorial to commemorate the failed 1982 Argentine invasion of the Falkland Islands. It was from Ushuaia that the Argentine cruiser General Belgrano sailed before being sunk by the Royal Navy with a loss of 323 lives. Anti-British propaganda can still be found around the waterfront. The tug St. Christopher has been grounded since 1957 in the harbor and now serves as an object of interest for tourists and as an excellent subject for photography. A significant generator of activity in Ushuaia is its pier, where during the austral summer there are numerous comings and goings of Antarctic cruise ships. Because of all the sailings of Antarctic cruise ships, there are last-minute deals available on cruises to Antarctica. Ushuaia, with a population of 57,000, is situated on the Beagle Channel, which was named after the Royal Navy ship HMS Beagle, which under the command of Captain Fitzroy first reached the channel in January 1833. We took one of the many Beagle Channel cruises available from Ushuaia that enable the viewing of wildlife, including shags, sea lions, and penguins. Our Beagle Channel cruise started at the Ushuaia Pier with its eclectic collection of ships ranging from a Spanish research ship, an ice-strengthened cruise ship, an Argentine Coast Guard cutter, and a cargo ship resupplying Ushuaia. Riding at anchor off the end of the pier were the boats of the wealthy tourists, including the super yacht Triton and the luxury sailing yacht Drumbeat. Off the end of the Ushuaia airport is an island with a large number of shags that blankets its surface. While we were watching the shags, there were several jetliners taking off in the distance. The Isla de los Lobos has a population of sea lions, including huge bull sea lions with their harems. Passing the lighthouse called the Cerro les Éclaireurs, we continued on to a Magellanic penguin colony. It was fascinating to watch the penguins flying back through the water to their beach.
Here comes some flying in. Look.
Amongst the Magellanic penguins were some seemingly lost penguin species, including gentoo and king penguins. While returning to Ushuaia, we passed by the MV Plancius, which was sailing down the Beagle Channel to Antarctica. The sunset on the way back to the Ushuaia Pier was glorious. Even though it was still the austral summer, there was fresh snow in the mountains. Back in Ushuaia that night, as we were having our end-of-trip celebration, cruise ships were departing on nighttime sailings to Antarctica.
Take me somewhere nice, to some tired island in your heart called paradise.